I'm Alexei professor at European University in St. Petersburg and also at Central European University in Budapest. It is the war which is possible after we have got nukes on both sides. I mean, that is the war which is which goes on in various spheres, but not with the intensity and with the totality which were characteristic for the First and the Second World War. So it is not full-scale military confrontation, but military confrontation is there, and military experts, Russian and Western, are engaged on both sides. Weapons from Russia and the West are engaged on both sides. We are definitely in a, how to put it, initial stage of a cyber war which can become extremely devastating. So there are plenty of areas where the war is going on, not speaking about information wars. The last, I would say, 10 to 15 years witnessed very significant changes in concepts of memory politics, be it on the side of EU or on the side of Russia. To begin with, before Eastern enlargement, European Union was based on a common concept of memory in which Holocaust was the crime of crimes, in which almost all European nations were involved, not to the same extent as Germans, but as collaborators, and it was perceived as a common European sin. And so to say, the narrative of self-victimization was not a part of this politics of the European Union. With the accession of the new member states, these states managed to impose their own agenda, which meant two things. All these states built their identity around the narrative of their own victimization, mostly by the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. The European memory got a new central element, which was not the comparison but equation of the Nazi regime and Nazi crimes and the Soviet regime and Soviet crimes. So every new member of the European Union tells you a story of their own genocide. And as a symbolic representation of this new situation, we have the day of commemoration of the victims of two totalitarian regimes, which is the day of the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. That is not to say that victims should not be commemorated, but one could imagine, for example, two separate days of commemoration. Now, on the Russian side, the narrative which was oriented towards building bridges to Europe by saying that Bolshevik revolution was a tragedy, by saying that communist crimes were a common tragedy which was suffered by Russian and other peoples of the Soviet Union, by saying that Russia is coming back to the values of European civilization, which it shared in the 19th century. We have now shifted to the narrative which was always present but was marginal, not dominant. And that is the narrative of Europe as the source of danger. And Russian history provides quite enough of material to build such a narrative. Uh, Three deadly, dangerous invasions of Russia during the last 2 centuries took place from the West. Napoleonic, the First World War and the Second World War. Russian perception of Germany, for example, during the last 20 years was focused on some sort of positive agenda of Russian-German collaboration. The role of Germans and their know-how in development of Russian science, etc., etc. Since 1914, Germany is seen as a country which regains her great power status and comes back to her policy of drang nach Osten and claiming the specific dominant role in Eastern Europe. What we are talking about is not about how it corresponds to reality. We are talking about narratives which shape opinions. And within 1 year, Germany moved from the first three of most positively viewed to the first three of most negatively viewed perceived nations in Russian public opinion. We are dealing now with a situation when one part, and this is European Union, claims that policy, its behavior, is value-based. And the other part, which is Russia, doesn't buy this argument and either thinks that people who appeal to values on the European side are naive, or thinks that those who use the talk of values somehow camouflage their realpolitik aims with the talk of values. Meaning that if you want to rebuild trust, which has been destroyed, absolutely, on both sides, you start with realpolitik talk. You say, okay, we don't trust each other. How can we make an agreement which is based on the assumption that we don't trust each other? How we can build into this agreement certain elements of mutual guarantees, etc., etc. And from that, further we can move trying to restore the talk about the common values.